June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach. 156,000 Allied troops storming 5 Normandy beaches. Steven Spielberg showed you machine gun nests. War movies focus on German 88mm guns. Video games emphasize bunker assaults. Every D-Day documentary highlights the Atlantic Wall's concrete fortifications and overlapping fields of fire from MG-42 machine guns. And 89% of Allied casualties on D-Day came from indirect fire weapons that most people have never heard of. Not machine guns, not rifle fire, not the famous 88s. German mortars and artillery killed more men in the first 6 hours than every other weapon combined. Let me show you the mathematics of D-Day's actual killer. Here's the brutal mathematics of indirect fire. The German 81mm Granatwerfer 34 mortar had a maximum range of 2,400 meters and a rate of fire of 15 to 25 rounds per minute. Each mortar crew consisted of 3 men who could fire, relocate, and fire again within 90 seconds. The blast radius of a single 81mm mortar round was 35 meters. Shrapnel remained lethal at 70 meters. One mortar crew could saturate an area the size of a football field every 3 minutes. The reality: German forces defending Normandy deployed approximately 450 mortars and 360 artillery pieces covering the 5 invasion beaches. That's 810 indirect fire weapons compared to 85 machine gun positions and 12 heavy gun emplacements. The ratio was 9-to-1 in favor of weapons that fired from positions Allied troops couldn't see, couldn't suppress, and couldn't effectively counterattack. But here's what nobody talks about. Machine guns created fear and pinned troops down. Mortars killed them while they were pinned. A soldier taking cover from machine gun fire behind a beach obstacle became a stationary target for mortar crews who had pre-registered every meter of the beach during months of preparation. German forward observers called in coordinates. Within 60 seconds, high explosive rounds rained down on men huddled behind obstacles that provided zero overhead protection. Now, let's examine the actual casualty data from Omaha Beach, the bloodiest landing zone. Of the 2,400 Allied soldiers killed or wounded in the first wave, approximately 2,136 casualties came from indirect fire. That's 89%. Medical records analyzed post-war showed fragmentation wounds consistent with mortar and artillery shells in 9 out of 10 casualties. Only 11% showed wounds from small arms fire or direct fire weapons. The mathematics of vulnerability reveal why indirect fire dominated. An infantry soldier on an open beach presents a target approximately half a meter wide and 1.7 meters tall when standing. That's 0.85 square meters. For a machine gunner firing from 600 meters, that's an extremely difficult shot, especially with soldiers running, smoke obscuring vision, and incoming naval gunfire creating chaos. Hit probability for MG-42 fire at 600 meters against running targets was approximately 4%. Compare that to mortar effectiveness. A single 81mm high-explosive round creates a lethal fragmentation zone covering 960 square meters. It doesn't need to hit you directly. It just needs to land within 35 meters. German mortar crews didn't aim at individual soldiers. They fired at map coordinates, saturating zones where Allied troops would inevitably concentrate. Landing craft ramps, beach obstacles, the seawall. Every location was pre-registered with multiple mortar positions. Here's where the mathematics become truly devastating. The German 352nd Infantry Division, defending Omaha Beach, conducted live fire exercises for 3 months before D-Day. They calculated exact trajectories to hit every beach section. They established communication trenches, allowing forward observers to direct fire without exposure. They stockpiled 24,000 mortar rounds within 800 meters of the beach. That's 30 rounds per Allied soldier in the first wave. The actual combat sequence tells the story. At 06:30 hours, first-wave landing craft approached Omaha Beach. German machine guns opened fire at 400 meters, creating visible threat. Allied troops sought cover behind beach obstacles and depressions in sand. At 06:33 hours, German mortar fire began. Forward observers called coordinates to mortar pits, positioned 200 to 600 meters inland, completely invisible to soldiers on the beach. Shells began falling at a rate of 180 rounds per minute across the entire beach frontage. Medical units documented the results. Casualties arriving at aid stations showed wound patterns consistent with fragmentation. Multiple penetration wounds across legs, torso, and head. These weren't bullet wounds, clean entry and exit. These were irregular tears from shell fragments moving at supersonic speeds. Combat medics reported that 73% of casualties treated in the first 2 hours had wounds from indirect fire. Many had multiple fragment wounds, indicating they were caught in overlapping blast zones. Let's examine the time mathematics of suppression versus killing. Machine gun fire suppressed Allied advance for approximately 40 minutes until naval gunfire destroyed visible bunkers and smoke obscured German observation. But mortar fire continued for 6 hours. German crews didn't need to see targets. They fired pre-planned barrages at timed intervals, knowing Allied soldiers would be in those zones. Even after Allied troops captured the first defensive line at 0900 hours, German mortars positioned 2 kilometers inland continued firing based on map coordinates. The comparative effectiveness reveals the final truth. Post-battle analysis showed German machine guns expended approximately 400,000 rounds on D-Day across all beaches. They caused approximately 800 casualties. That's 500 rounds per casualty. German mortars fired approximately 18,000 rounds. They caused approximately 8,000 casualties. That's 2.25 rounds per casualty. Mortars were 222 times more efficient at killing Allied soldiers than machine guns. Compare the resource investment. An MG-42 machine gun cost 400 Reichsmarks and required a 3-man crew in a reinforced concrete bunker that took 3 months to build. An 81mm mortar cost 80 Reichsmarks, required a 3-man crew in a simple hole in the ground that took 3 hours to dig. The weapon that caused 89% of casualties cost 1/5 as much and could be repositioned in 90 seconds. A U.S. Army after-action report from the 116th Infantry Regiment stated it bluntly. Enemy small arms fire was surprisingly ineffective and caused relatively few casualties. Indirect fire from mortars and artillery caused approximately 90% of casualties and was the primary factor preventing rapid advance off the beach. Troops showed greater fear of machine guns but died from shells they never saw coming. The math is undeniable. 8,000 casualties from indirect fire. 800 casualties from direct fire. 18,000 mortar rounds versus 400,000 machine gun bullets. The weapon that killed 89% of Allied troops on D-Day was the weapon that Hollywood never shows because it isn't cinematic. You can't film the dramatic moment when an invisible shell lands 30 meters away and sends supersonic fragments through your body. You can't create a hero moment against a weapon firing from a position you cannot see, cannot target, and cannot assault. So war movies show machine gun nests while the real killer sits in a hole 600 meters inland, firing at map coordinates, killing men who never knew what hit them. D-Day proved that modern warfare isn't won by the weapon soldiers fear most. It's won by mathematics, trajectory tables, and high explosive shells falling from the sky.